It's time for world politics, and of course, there's all kinds of political things taking place, and definitely here in the United States and around the world. And we were talking about some of those on World Edition and on other shows as well. As a matter of fact, I just had the opportunity to be a guest on a show that is kind of a semi-comedy show. So Rick will enjoy that because it was definitely using improv, and it was on another network, but it was called The Perfect Podcast because part of the routine is the gentleman's trying to come up with a perfect podcast. If he doesn't come up with a perfect podcast, he winds up getting locked up and staying locked up and all along those lines. And I hate to tell him, but this particular show wasn't a perfect podcast, even though Winnie the Pooh made a cameo appearance and all along those lines. But it was definitely not a perfect podcast and all in that space. So definitely it was fun because I got to test out some of my own improv and straight man skills and all along those lines in that 30-minute show that I was part of and all along those lines. Before I bring in my guests, earlier today we were talking about different parts of the country and Ohio versus Florida versus North Carolina. And I think Steve made the statement, or not Steve, but Nick made the statement that racism wasn't that big of a deal in Florida and all along those lines. And I just came back from a lunch appointment, and my friend who used to do photography in Miami and other parts of Florida wanted to know if he had remembered things like Brownville, if he had remembered the Cuban boat lift, if he had remembered the Haitian boat lift, if he had remembered a number of other things, because I even brought up Rosewood, which was a neighborhood in the early 1920s, and they made a movie about it where some folks were middle class and an African American community and were overrun by some neighbors who were European American and all along those lines. And of course, like Emmett Till, there was accusations of rape and some other things in the storyline that the movie featured Don Cheadle and was a John Singleton movie and all along those lines. But it was based on historical facts and all in that kind of way. But definitely, those kind of things happen, and just something that Martin Freed wanted me to remind people that there have been incidences even there in Florida as well. By the way, coming to politics, and I'm getting ready to bring in Rick Rosner and Steve Rao. And of course, I've got one of the other founders, Kim Calhoun, with me as well. But Senator Bob Menendez has been found guilty on all counts, including acting as a foreign agent in a federal corruption trial. So Democratic Senator Bob Menendez has been found guilty on all counts. So it looks like the Republicans got their folks that have been found guilty, that being Trump. And now it looks like the Democrats have got a major one as well. So definitely the Senate Democrats tell Menendez to resign or face expulsion after that particularly guilty verdict. And Chuck Schumer is calling him to resign. So we'll see if he actually resigns or doesn't resign or not. So we'll see how this all goes on. And of course, people are still talking about the assassination attempt that took place on this past weekend and all along those lines. So we'll definitely see how this all plays out and as we learn more about the particular shooter and all in that kind of way. So definitely it's a political show, and there's all kinds of world political things happening as well. I mentioned some of those on World Edition, including the fact that Israel has rained down 8 tons of bombs to target a top militant. So the Israel strikes in southern central Gaza, and they're saying it killed more than 60 Palestinians, including some in what is considered a safe zone and all along those lines. So we'll see what happens in that space. And definitely it looks like the French government resigns and stays on now in the caretaker role. So definitely they're making a transition in Florida as Macron accepts the French Prime Minister Attal's resignation, but asks him to stay on as a caretaker until the new leadership comes on as well. And a North Korea diplomat in Cuba has defected to South Korea. So it looks like there's some defections going on as well. And it looks like Gambia, I was going to get to this on the news, but I didn't get to it, has kept the ban on female genital cuttings after fears it would be repealed. So definitely it looks like that practice and the response to it is definitely going to be keeping that ban going, even though I do know that in some places it is a cultural thing and all along those lines. So I'm going to bring in my folks, and I'm sure they've got things to say primarily about the political landscape. I do know that later on today, Biden will be going and speaking to none other than the NAACP. So I think that he might have already done that because I think that was scheduled for 4 o'clock, and I think Trump's still doing some campaigning as well. And of course, the RNC is going on. And I have not been watching it, but I want to see Rick if he's been watching any of this whole convention. We know the Republicans are doing theirs now. The Democrats are doing theirs later. So this is day 2. Have you been turning on your news? And if so, have you been watching
Not a lot, because I would just it's like watching Fox News. You can only, as a liberal, I can only watch for a couple minutes before I get annoyed and have to change the stuff. I've been watching the WNBA. So, but let me just say that Bob Menendez is such an asshole. Found guilty, 16 counts, a potential 222 years in jail. I don't know what he'll really get sentenced to, but he's 70 years old. I don't know if that means that he spends the rest of his life in jail, but just an idiot. He's done stuff like this before, but the last time he went on trial for it, he had a hung jury. Just dumb. I mean, the guy makes $174,000 a year as a senator. It doesn't have to work that, the senator's week is what, 30 hours a week, except for fundraising, lifetime pension. I don't know, as a convicted felon, if he loses the pension, but just a freaking idiot.
That's a very idiotic move and everything. As I get ready to bring in one of our founders, Kim Calhoun, and everything, I do have to ask you, because I like to have fun with some of the stories, even serious stories as well. So I just want to know, have you and Kim been checking your bananas? And I do mean bananas as in the fruit, because apparently the fine country of Ecuador, 6 tons of cocaine were found in a banana shipment. So there might be some cocaine in your bananas if you've not been checking your bananas. So have you been checking your bananas? Because apparently they found 6 tons of cocaine in one of their banana shipments.
And you're muted, so unmute.
You're muted.
I eat bananas all the time, so that would be quite a shock to me to find something like that. But they're injecting supposedly vaccines in our fruits and vegetables. That bill was passed a few months ago. God knows what's going to be in our vegetables, and now we know, right? This cocaine. Wow, that's scary. That the first thing I give kids is a banana. Right? I mean, do you think it was just smuggled in?
It could have been just smuggled in. It could be part of their way of getting things out, because there is a notorious criminal from here in Durham named Frank Matthews, and part of his storyline that he had when he was around the Vietnam War and everything, and they were literally shipping drugs in, sometimes with the coffins of the dead soldiers and everything. So there's no telling how people might choose to transport
was it inside the banana, like when you peel it? Did they grow in there?
They come in big bunches. I bet you they hollowed out the bunch, and it was bananas on the outside and cocaine on the inside.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting way to smuggle things, but I think today, in this day and time, it's pretty stupid. Yeah. There's just too many ways to catch things, and you're not going to get as much in. I think, if you want to deal in drugs, deal locally, Stop. I mean, I'm not condoning dealing drugs. Shut up, Kelly.
No, I know.
I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying, be smart about it. If you're going to do
being smart about it,
doesn't make business sense to export anymore.
Well, speaking of business sense and even the smart business sense, if you are part of a country that has its own troubles and everything, I don't know how much sense it makes to bring your law enforcement to a troubled country and everything. But apparently 200 more Kenyan police have arrived in Haiti because they want to help the country tackle their violent criminal gangs and everything. But I do know that even Kenya has its own issues, but apparently they're trying to help another country by shipping some police officers over there. So the Kenyan police are to begin patrols, but apparently the Haitian gangs are unperturbed, so maybe they're not even worried about the fact.
Do they have gun problems like we do? I mean, I think I would start there, and if I were going after crime, and I would take a look at the gun issues and what the police are having to deal with and everything, because when you're battling crime, guns, like Nick, he's moving to a country where they have 1 death a year due to a gun. I think Rick found the stats. Yes, Rick.
It's a fundamental exercise to ask yourself, if you found $600,000 worth of cocaine, or just say like $2 million in a duffel bag by the side of the road in cash, what do you do? Because how do you move that? Do you move it? I mean, yeah, you can take the easy way out and just bring it to the police, but that's no fun.
But Rick, that comes down
I
to what I
can't
was saying.
imagine bananas there. Oh boy,
Bananas.
look what I found in my banana.
Bananas. But Rick,
They're
that comes down to
bananas.
what I was saying earlier. Because like I said, Kenya's got its own problems because one was killed as the Kenyan anti-government
Oh, yeah.
protests were intensifying. So the police in Kenya were using tear gas to break up new protests calling for the president to resign. So you got your own problems, but you're going to send the police to another country to help their problem when you've got your own problem. So I'm still trying to figure out the logic of this when I do know that the Kenyans were having their own protests and they were even having Kenya police crack down as protesters were returning to the streets nationwide. So they got that many police that they can spare to go to Haiti?
I don't know, but I just want to go back to the cocaine thing for 1 second with a recommendation for viewing. There's a TV series by Guy Ritchie called The Gentleman, which is loosely related to a movie he made called The Gentleman. Mm-hmm. And I think the TV series is more fun than the movie. It's on one of the streaming services, and it's about that issue where a kid comes back home. His dad is a lord or something. He lives on an estate and finds out that the estate is being used as a drug headquarters. And the kid has to decide what he does about that. And, you know, there's a lot of trouble.
It sounds like.
There's a lot to be said about that. I think the drug problem is in every country. I can't even look at what one country doesn't have a problem with it, except for when I was in Bali. I never smelled the pot. I never witnessed anyone doing drugs or trading off drugs in the streets or at the clubs. I didn't even see any people really smoking cigarettes. Like, I'm sure they did, because when you came into the country, the airport had boxes and boxes and boxes of cigarettes everywhere, but I didn't see any of the people smoking. I was told that it's a very severe punishment, probably death penalty in Bali, to be caught with drugs. So,
I mean, it kind of speaks to the correlation between being poor and turning to drugs.
Yeah,
which is certainly the case in the U.S. In the U.S., you have a horrible job that messes up your back. You go to the doctor, they prescribe opioids for the pain.
Pharmaceutical.
You're hooked, and good luck, getting off of them.
Well, not only do you get hooked, but then you can't get a fix because the DA says you can't keep having them. So then you turn to the streets, and now everything's fentanyl. Everything is lined with fentanyl. So.
Yeah, but if you're rich enough to go to Bali, your life is probably nice enough that you don't need to do opioids.
No, they're so happy there, and probably from all the sun, right, and everything, and they're so peaceful. Everything is about thanking God, not about asking Him for things. Which is interesting to me, because they do live a very meager life, very, very compared to us. But every day they bring these blessings and give the blessings to their God, and they're just so thankful for everything that they do have and happy. I'm sure they have their sadness, right?
They're not going to show it to. They're not going to show it
to the tourists. They want tourists to come back. And
yeah, right.
Well, the thing is I immersed myself in the community. I did not go stay in a tourist place. I did go to them just to see them, but I literally moved into a community. And actually, the family keeps asking me to come back. I think they adopted me, but I loved it. I loved the fact that the emphasis wasn't drugs, really wasn't drinking. They had cute little liquor stores. Down the street, like little bitty alcohol stores, totally different emphasis. So, but I think you're right. They're just happier there. They swim all day. They, in the ocean, eat good food. I mean, it's just,
Now, you were saying earlier, because I think that's most like the statistics, where it's like maybe a percentage. That's where you're thinking it might be one murder, but there has definitely been more than one murder in Spain and all along those lines. And that's even
one gun with a gun, according to Nick.
and I'm not even sure of that, but one of the things that apparently is a problem, and the New York Times even did an article on it in last year and everything, because the machismo culture, whether it is the Hispanic machismo or the Spanish culture, can be very much a thing in some of those cultures. And definitely there's even been a surge in murders of women. And they were even last year, it was alarming the government of Spain that they were under pressure to combat gender violence after authorities say were the killing of at least 8 women last year by former or current partner. So they've even had
they have a very unusual means of torturing women in some of these countries. I was just reading about it. It's kind of scary. And rape can be a big factor in some of these things, as well as theft is. Nick doesn't understand this, but pickpocketing over there is huge. So.
No, he does. He's talked about it.
Yeah, he talked about the pickpocketing.
The murder rate in Spain is 1/8 the murder rate in the U.S. In 2022, they had about 300 murders in Spain. I don't know how many.
Are we measuring that on a per capita basis, though? I mean,
well, no. The per capita murder rate is 1/8.
If you want to look at 2020. And this dropped because they said the number of homicides in Spain fell gradually when it was 587 in 2003, and then it was 325 in 2022. But that's still more than one and everything. So they definitely do have some folks that are.
I think realistically, but go ahead.
So the murder rate in the U.S. is 1 person out of 20,000 per year. Right. In Spain, it's about 1 person in 160,000.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge difference, and I think it's the culture, right? I think it's the influence of the culture, the influence of the leaders. They're very strict. You're not, and when you're busted, it's not you're innocent until you're proven guilty. So I mean. There's a lot of things that play in other countries that we don't do.
That's very true. But Kim, along those same lines, and actually, she was actually picking more, and I think it's one of your friends, more on Nick and some of the other panelists. But it could be said of you as well, because one of the things that Terry said, I think it was either yesterday or it might have been today as well, and everything, is that it sounds good in theory to be able to go to a place like Bali, to be able to go to Spain and all along those lines. But we do know that with class differences and economical differences, that not everybody can afford to get on a plane and to go on these trips. And yes, I do know that there are different discounts. I know some countries.
That sounds like a Terry comment.
They want people to get to the place and everything. But what do you say to those folks that maybe want to go to Bali or want to go to some of these places, but don't have the economic means? Because that's really what Terry was saying, was that it sounded good for, as she put it, those rich white men to say that. And she was talking about some of the things they were saying in reference to defending Trump and everything.
She could be and maybe Rick can help me out on this too. I mean, it's like I was telling someone today, people just can't go uproot and move to another state because they don't like the laws. That's not economically feasible, and it's not great. But I have a right to be in this state. I would, if I want to be here, and I should have rights for my own body and mind and soul. I shouldn't have to worry about the laws changing, making me want to leave. Bali is just nice. I enjoyed it. It was economically good for me, but it was good for my soul. I really just felt good there. But there are ways to do that in your own country. Like count your blessings instead of counting your problems. Count your blessings first and then approach your problems differently. Accept what you have rather than wanting to change. I mean, we all want to change, but go ahead, Rick. I mean, there's just ways.
If you're young, I don't know if we have a lot of younger viewers, but if you're just out of college or out of high school and, you've got a certain amount of confidence and maybe a friend to go with, you can get a Eurail pass to travel through Europe. 3 months, $620.
Wow.
It's 3 years. Wow.
That's one week in the United States, Rail. That's not even a whole week.
You have to find places to stay, but you stay in a hostel. You can, in a lot of European cities, you can probably find a hostel for, I don't know, 40 or 50 bucks a night.
And but I guess the
We've
point
got
is
hostels here. My son
there are hostels
is
here.
staying at one, and like he's traveling around like that, and it's economical, and they're easy to work with. His trip got delayed, and he contacted them. They said, "Don't worry about it." They didn't like not refund him like you do with hotels.
But Kim, there's a flip side to that though, because even with the hostels and even with the bed and breakfasts and the what do you call them? The not ARPs, but the ones where you're renting your home and everything.
Airbnb.
Yeah, because even here in Durham, and they just finally got the couple out. There was a couple that rented a home and they actually refused to leave. So I imagine that there can happen in Spain and other places, but they were called by one of those consumer agencies, by one of the other TV networks, and they just were squatting. Basically, they finally, I think, got out.
That happened in LA. There's a woman in LA who figured out the system, and she did that too. And there's good and bad. You just have to stay on top. Even good contracts aren't going to get a person honest. And make sure you don't get screwed. The Airbnbs, I only stay in them if I have somebody I know, because they've been getting a bad rap. Like some of them have cameras, they're watching you. Just kind of scary, but that's anything in life. And just be cautious.
You gotta be cautious. But speaking of being cautious and all along those lines, because we did a special earlier today and everything, and I don't know the answer to this question. Maybe you can tell me, because you talk more than I do to Irene, and I know we have this highly popular show that deals with it, timeshares, definitely, which deals with that whole notion of whether we're going to have solutions or non-solutions and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, when we talk about the timeshare issue and the places like Westgate and Holiday Inn, is this just strictly a U.S. problem, or is the timeshare scams a international problem? Because
it's international.
I haven't heard as much even on Irene's show.
And there are various different layers of scams when you start peeling the onion. One of them was in another country, and they were literally like the timeshares were set up and looked very honest and respectable. But when the guests were gone, they were going through the safes and cleaning them out, So and it was part of the scam. So you have to in anything, and timeshares in themselves. You know what? People just don't buy. Don't. They're not good anymore. They used to be. That's the reason why Irene's doing this. She's had hers for many, many years. And because she knows it inside out, she's able to make it work for her. But the ones that they have now are such scams, and they're predatory on the people who've had them for years, making them upgrade or like the people will go to them and say, "Can I get out?" And they'll go, "Well, we haven't seen you in a while. Give us your credit card. We'll get together some paperwork. You can sign it and we'll work on it." And then they're 80 some years old. They're retired. They're tired. They're, can't read that well. I'm not saying people 80 years old can't, but you know what I mean. And some of them, a spouse has died or something, and they sign the paperwork thinking they're being honest, and they gave them their credit card, their driver's license, everything comes back, and they go home and they have $30,000 charged on their credit card, and they have a $100,000 mortgage now against them. And it's horrible because they signed a piece of paper that they didn't read, which is what timeshare.
A lot of people are that. We got Steve.
What happens to a lot of people are people my age, people in their 50s and 60s, who remember when they were kids, they went to timeshares with their parents. Now their parents are in their 80s or have passed away, and the kids have, inherited a timeshare and have no idea that it's now a very predatory business. And then some kid who's 61 years old finds out how much it costs to keep paying for the timeshare every year. It doesn't, and then they try to get out of it. And there are, the timeshare people, there are plenty of scammers who are ready to prey on people my age.
No doubt about
Well,
that.
it's
But looking
not
back,
just the timeshares. This is something people don't understand. There's another faucet to all of this, and it's called the timeshare exit companies. And there's actually one parading itself as a lawyer, which Irene and I busted, which was quite interesting. And Nick like read through it and he couldn't believe it. Like he was blown away. But they call themselves Encore Law Group, which there is a Encore Law Group, a real one. And so when you Google it first, so when they come to you and say, okay, we're part of Encore Law Group, people Google it and they see all of these gorgeous, beautiful lawyers from this big law firm. And then they go, okay, yeah, we're part of that. And you read the contract and it's Encore Law, Encore Law, Encore Law. And they are not.
yeah,
They are
I
not.
knew that and everything.
They are
Yeah.
fake.
Yeah, but getting back to the political front, because I know we got
Fake. And they're
Right.
taking
One-
and everything.
$3,000
Getting
per
back to that,
client.
that's how we've got.
So one
Steve
last
here.
hold on.
Here.
One last thing
Hi,
about
Steve.
timeshare. I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. If you end up inheriting a timeshare, you're doing well if you can just get out of it, turn it back to the company, cancel with no more annual fees, right? Because
So to understand it, you have to understand the timeshare law. So when your parents bought it, you automatically became the inheritor, whether you wanted to or not. And when they die, whether you know it or not, you are liable for it 100%. By the time they die, which was probably maybe 30 years after they bought it, the maintenance fees on it are probably running about $5,000 a month now. So because they go up every year, literally, I've reviewed enough to know there are some that 3,000.
No,
So these
definitely,
people
definitely one
inherit
of our more
that,
popular
that
shows. I definitely want to
kids
get back
do,
to the
and they
political
can't
side
get
and
out.
everything.
There
just
is
really
no
quickly,
way out.
because we do have Steve here, and we do
But
have
Irene says there is.
yeah,
Irene says that there is a way out.
there ways out, and we definitely hear that on the show and everything. Definitely, it's a great show, Irene.
But
does
hi,
an
Steve.
excellent
Let's
job
talk
and
a little
everything.
bit politics now that Steve's here.
Yeah, that was
Yeah. Sorry,
because I had a
I was
question for you, because we have a vice presidential challenge, Steve, because apparently Kamala Harris has laid down the gauntlet. I think that they were doing some campaigning toward the NAACP and everybody else, but it sounds like Kamala Harris has reached out to Mr. Vance and thrown down the first gauntlet for a vice presidential debate. So do you think that that was a good move, and do you think that he will take the bite of this offer to go into a debate? Because Kamala did that earlier today. She threw out the first punch in that part of the thing and said she would love to debate Mr. Vance.
I think it's a good move on her part, but I do believe that he would be. He's a pretty quick. He's pretty quick on his feet. He's pretty articulate. He's pretty sharp. He's a young guy. He's written a book, been in a movie. I don't think it's going to be as easy for him or her. I think it'll be a little bit harder than debating Mike Pence. I think she'll have to just stick on her point, but I think he will bring out the border issue, which I don't think was handled very well by the Biden administration. I was just on a call with the White House on the affordable housing plan, and I still couldn't understand what they were talking about. So that's part of the problem, right? Is how do you boil it down to in areas I understand? But I think it's good to have a debate. I think she's pretty articulate herself, and let's not forget that Vice President Harris was a prosecutor and the Attorney General. So I mean, she's pretty good.
Debate. But Steve, along those same lines, because that's been an issue. We've been talking about that on World Edition earlier and everything. Because despite what people are saying, I know that some people are defending, as Nick was earlier, the landlords and all along those lines. But a lot of people are complaining about housing, complaining about the rent, complaining about mortgages. So what exactly were they saying that you didn't understand? Because my guess is that they're trying to.
Oh no, I mean I think the main thing is just capping the rent to 5%, and then if they don't, waiving the tax credits. But sometimes it's just my opinion about the Biden administration. They get into so much of the technocratic details. After about 10 minutes, they just lose you. I mean, I got to be honest with you. I was on the call because I was invited, but I was trying to get the thing, and then my wife called me on her way back from work, and we were just talking for 5 minutes. The next thing I know, the call's over. I mean, that's exactly my point, Mark. I think the problem is that before Rick Rosner goes, I just think part of the problem is they're not really coming in at a really high level and saying, these are the things that are going well in the U.S., and this is why we need another 4 years to complete these things. So the messaging is all over the map, and now so much of it has become against Donald Trump that they're not talking enough about them. What have I done the last 4 years? So, Rick Rosner, your point.
If you watch,
I
know Rick needs to talk, but I want to add something. I watched a really hardcore interview with Donald, and in there he said that the reason why the Republicans lost last time is they missed their messaging mark on certain things.
Well,
they said we were wrong. We didn't answer these questions because we did not know how to talk about them.
As a political commentator, my prediction is that here's my prediction just based on looking at Donald Trump will win this election. He'll be the next president because it's going to be based on the economy. And the swing states, this is a referendum on President Biden, and the undecideds are going to be focusing more on the economy and their wallets. And unless inflation comes down more and prices, and unless the Fed comes down with interest rates, I think Donald Trump will be. I'm predicting right now that Donald Trump will be elected the 47th president of the United States. J.D. Vance will make history. He'll be the youngest vice president of the United States history. And then the good news is the Democrats, unless they get another nominee, and it's not going to be anyone else but Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, they have 4 years now to focus on the next candidate they have for the presidency, which is most likely Governor Newsom. Go ahead, Rick.
So I just wanted to share some numbers about renters in the U.S. 100 million renters in the U.S. 10.5 million landlords in the U.S. So when Biden says cap renting rates, he's going to appeal to more people than he's going to turn off.
Right.
And I predict Biden is going to narrowly win. When you look at polling right now, and you can't look at polling because polling is crappy, but it's roughly tied. And, we go into every election with things being roughly tied. The last president to get more than 53% of the popular vote was in 1988.
But I always predict this. The one thing I will say, I think moving forward, and I had this prediction a few years ago, I think moving forward, you're going to see a lot of one-term presidents now. Because I think the presidency has become so hard, the country is so divided, that it's really hard to be the president as the nominee of the Democratic Party and then lead the entire nation. And so even if you're elected president, today, it's not like the people of this country are saying, that's our president. Half the country believes that is their president. Half the country does not believe that he is the president. So since the day he was elected, there's been nothing to be doing but to take him down. Now, the same thing now, I think it could change in 4 years, unless a unifier would come along, somebody that could bring us together. I find it sad that I have to go to John F. Kennedy's inaugural in 1961 to remember that what he reminded the American people is that every so often, a generation will come along that has to fight for democracy and freedom. And that it's not easy, but that our enemies are not the enemies that we face at home, but the enemies that face mankind. Disease, poverty, war. So in his words, he said, because I've been listening to it every day when I run, he says, it's not a call to battle, although a battle we are in. It's not a call to arms, although arms we will need. It's not a call to war, because war we will need. But we need Americans to come together in this to answer the trumpet and summons to our democracy. And this fire, this light will light up the world. And that fire, he goes, this will light a fire that will then light up the world. And, he got a standing ovation when he made that comment, but somehow we've forgotten that. And I feel really sad that I had to go back to 1961 to listen to a president, but it was a different time, right? People looked at
you have to remember, and I love going back and listening to those. I love We Are the People, right? We are the government. We are the people, and the people are the government, and we're not. We're finding out we are not the government. But I predict, and I want to hear what Mark predicts, but I predict that the Federal Reserve is the swing vote. The people have such memory spans that whatever and he's already said he's going to lower it. Now, whether he lowers it and adjusts things for the economy before the election or after,
and also, yeah, that's a point. And we don't know what the courts are going to do. Whether, the thing is that there's so many felony convictions against Trump. But to play devil's advocate, I do think
I already know what's going to happen. I mean, we've already seen, they're already sympathizing with him, and that they decided to drop the one case. I already started predicting with the hush money case, because I already went and reviewed it. A judge had already ruled a year ago that none of what the core of the case had no presidential acts associated with it. No official presidential acts. It was already ruled upon, yet they were given permission to delay the sentencing based on the rulings of the Supreme Court that he might have immunity. But they already ruled that there was no official acts. So why are they given that? It's all a game, right? It's all a game.
Well, it's all a game and everything.
They're going to go back, and they're going to give him an acquittal.
No, there's probably several acquittals. I would agree with that and everything. I actually think that it is Trump's lose, but I also think that Trump has a habit of sticking his foot in his mouth. He hasn't done it yet as much as he's been known to do it, and some people haven't caught him. But I personally think that he's going to do something or say something stupid that will cost him the election and everything. So I do think that Biden can still win the election, just because Trump has a habit of putting his foot in his mouth and doing things along those lines and everything.
Is that the foot mouth disease going around right now? Did you hear about that? We have a pandemic right now, foot mouth disease.
A counter question and everything. Well, two things. One, economically speaking, it is my understanding, and I don't understand the S&P the way that some of our economists, even on this network, understand it. But in the last 5 years, it's actually doubled. So it's actually done better. I know that Milan would be glad about that, because that's one of the people that's on Sasha's show and everything. And he is a big believer in investing in the S&P 500. But it looks like that has doubled. So that would be doubling during the majority of the Biden administration, and maybe 1 year of Trump and everything. So when we say that the economy isn't doing well, the stock market and other things, to your point, actually prove that that's true. So I think that the Democrats need to do a better job of getting that out there, because I think that some of the prices, there's some prices.
We have to go to Rick.
We need to go to Rick, and then I got something really funny to say about the S&P. Go ahead, Rick.
All right, 2 days in a row, the Dow Jones has hit an all-time high. Went up 200 points yesterday, I think 700 points today, more than 1.5%. It's so, maybe we've got 100 days, maybe that message will seep through. I just want to respond to Steve saying that he thinks we're going to have a lot of one-term presidents in the future, which is possible because, back in 1961, which you were talking about, we had 3 networks, and they had national news for a half hour a day. Now we have, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, preaching division 24 hours a day. So the average approval by president has declined steadily since we first started looking at presidential approval 80 years ago. Doesn't matter much who's the president, just whoever it is, we hate them more and more every 4 years.
Yeah,
but hold on.
Every election is a referendum on it.
Let me finish. So there are 2 things that work against that. One is the Republicans have an electoral college advantage, which we've seen play out. They lose the popular vote, they win the presidency anyway. However, the Democrats have a demographic advantage. And we've been talking about this for decades. It hasn't really kicked in yet, but the Republicans rely on white people and old people to put them over the top. And both those populations are shrinking relative to the total population.
And they're relying on the Christians as well. But and I want to say something funny though about the S&P. The reason why is it really was funny. I was meeting with my advisor, and he always likes to go into history, right? And he goes into the history, and he always tells me, because he is, I guess, a big Trump fan too, but they're always talking about how things were better under Clinton and Trump, right? The S&P was just so much better. It really, everything got better under Clinton, and then Trump, everything, we've got the charts here to prove it. And, you can look at charts one way or the other, but I just looked at him and I go, okay, you just mentioned two presidents, and one thing they have common is what? Extramarital sex. Okay. So what I see is sex and presidents is the driving factor of the S&P that we have, right? Just kidding.
It could be.
I know that was funny. He laughed.
It could be.
The S&P is actually sex and president driving
sex and
factor.
presidents. That could be very much the case. But Steve brought up a good point and everything. But I have a question for you, Steve, because I also love that speech, just like I love a lot of Kay's speeches, and I also love some of the radicals folks out there, whether that was people with the Weather Underground or the definitely some of the people that were connected with Malcolm X and other things. So they definitely have had some great moments and some great speeches. But one of the things that I would say has been going on for a multitude of decades is kind of a, and folks in sociology have talked about it, this kind of me attitude and what's good for me, not necessarily what's good for the betterment of society. So whether it's the millennials or whether it's the baby boomer or everything, while I love that speech, I don't know that even that speech would resonate with our young people, because a lot of times they'd be sitting there going like, what do you mean? What am I doing for others? I'm trying to do for me, and all along those lines, because that's just what I would argue, that I'm not even sure that while it's a good speech and while it sounded very passionate and got all those applause in the early 60s, I'm not sure, as y'all know, I have no kids, but I'm not sure that my nephews would resonate with that speech and everything, because, and even your kids, I'm not sure, Steve, that they would resonate with it, because a lot of it is about the me attitude and what you're doing for your own businesses and all along those lines. So I agree with you that it's a powerful speech.
My daughter is very special. She's very driven. She does a lot of things to help the community, but she's one of those special souls. She was helping the homeless in Puerto Rico, and then she helped the homeless in Samos, and now she's going to Nairobi. She was in South Africa for 6 months. But she's a journalist. She graduated from UNC, but she's the exception. I mean, she'll go and she'll move somewhere to change the world. But you're right. I think a lot of people her age, that's what I've always admired about my daughter, is that if I was the same age, even back then, I just was a college kid, worrying about where I was going to go to the next meal, wonder when I was going to see my girlfriend next, who's now my wife. And, pretty much my life was about my next tennis match and my next time I was going to see my wife, at a time when we had no cell phones and those kinds of things. So, but you're right. I think it's so easy to get so self-absorbed. People are looking at, their video games, their apps. It's a very self-absorbed society, and I think it's really hard. But I think community service and public service could be a good way to bring us together. Some kind of a civil service corps working on projects, bringing people from different walks of life. Might really be, I know Fareed Zakaria has talked about it, but that might be something that our country needs, I think.
No, I agree, but does Vista even exist? Because when my parents had their radio station, we had Vista volunteers, and I haven't looked online to see if it is still an existing program, but that was really that notion of kind of doing public service that was for the community, and that you would be put out in different places, because we had Vista volunteers that came even to the radio station in Warren County. And I guess I could look it up on Google like many of us do and everything, but I don't hear about it the way that I used to. And yes, there are programs like Doctors with Borders that I know still exist and other things, but they don't get the same kind of play that they did in the past. That's kind of my point and everything. And a lot of the young people are not joining in the droves the way that they might have in the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah, I don't know if this exists, but I think that it's, I think that it's just hard to educate people on these opportunities. That's the problem, right? I mean, I think that these things exist, but there's American Service Corps, which is another organization.
That's Vista. Vista is AmeriCorps, because it's AmeriCorps Vista. So yeah, so I just looked it up. It does still exist. It was founded in '65, actually founded around the time by Kennedy and everything. So I just looked it up, because it was founded as volunteers in service to America in 1965, but now it's known as AmeriCorps Vista. So it does exist, but that's the AmeriCorps. But I still don't hear as much of the publicity as I remember hearing back in the day and everything. So I'm glad to see that it is still an existing program, because the whole notion is that being a volunteer in the service to America is kind of what the notion is. And if they're saying you can serve in any U.S. state or territory, because I think it's an American program. I don't think it's like Peace Corps. I don't think that you go outside of the area, because you're supposed to be working to make sustainable changes in areas that affect poverty, including education, public health, climate, access to benefits, and other things like that. So I didn't do what I said I was going to do and look it up. So I'm glad to see that it exists. But I mean, I don't see her as much publicity. And Kim, we might have to see if we can get Michael Smith on, because apparently Michael Smith is the CEO, and I'm crazy enough to try to reach out to him and see if they want to come on TV and all along those lines.
You get the best guests. I want to share something with you. I just found one of Kennedy's speeches, and there's a section in it. I'm not sure I got it exactly on it, but it's a good one. He's always a good speaker, right? And let's just share a little bit. And Steve, maybe you can send me a link of your favorite. But let's just for a second. I mean,
Kim's got to hit play.
Hit play.
I love the way he would say, "Why did he go to the moon? Not because it is easy, because it is hard."
Yeah.
It's hard.
You got to hit play on your side.
So while we're waiting for that, I just looked it up, and economists, traders, bond traders or whatever, are 100% certain that the Fed will cut interest rates by September.
So that could help Biden then.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not over yet.
No, and I don't think it's over in the least bit. Oh, she just disappeared. So maybe she's trying to find that video. Maybe she'll come back and get it before we get off the air. But yeah, it is definitely, I don't think anything is over. What's said, saying it's not over to the fat lady things. I hate to make the weight jokes and everything, because I know sometimes people in the weight journey can take that as being offensive as well and everything. But it is a old saying and an old cliche. And I definitely think that we won't know until we know. Speaking of that, hey, Steve, I know that you were, Jacoby was working on the cricket match, and I know you're a big cricket fan, but there's another sport that we were talking about that.
We were there together yesterday. I forgot to mention. We were there together yesterday. I was on the field with them.
Cool.
Yeah.
But I was going to say today is a big day, because there is a sport that is American as apple pie, according to many people, which is baseball. And later on this evening, the All-Star game will be taking place. I think they've already done some of the home run derbies and all along those lines. So people will be getting ready to get their sports on. And I think later on this month, people will be getting their nationalistic sports on, because a lot of people like to root for their country or their country of affinity, meaning the country that they like, because the Olympics should be starting very soon as well. Rick?
So I've got a candidate for the October surprise scandal. The October surprise is something that happens in the month before an election that changes the odds. And last night, Trump nodded off at the RNC. And so, as he did in court. So there's a possibility. Now, and also Trump's people are not releasing any medical records from the treatment he got after the assassination attempt. But there's a chance that one or both of the candidates will find out, that they're on some drug to make them more alert, because they both kind of need it. Somebody may leak that information or may make up that information, in the weeks before the election.
That's a definite possibility. I am curious to see what Biden said to the NAACP, because that was earlier today as well, while the Republicans are doing their convention. But yeah, it looks like about 2 hours ago, he spoke at the NAACP's 115th national convention. And apparently one of the things that he said was that violence is not the answer. So apparently there's already getting some comments back from his response and all along those lines. So he definitely spoke to that powerful African-American group and all along those lines. So we'll see how the full speech went and how he did in terms of that, because that was taking place in Nevada, I believe. I'm not sure whether it was Las Vegas or where it was in Nevada, but it just looked like President Biden is on the campaign trail, because as you said, Rick, he is digging in and he's not trying to end and everything. And a lot of people are anxiously looking forward to hear what Nikki Haley has to say. I know there's some people, I think even Steve was trying to say that she
Yeah,
would have been a good
popcorn that. I think she'll be
candidate.
Secretary of State if he wins. I think.
You think she'll be Secretary of State?
Yeah. Yeah.
She
I think so.
had $15 million in unused campaign funds. She's already kicked that back to the party for them to spend on advertising.
She's kicked it. Oh, she kicked it back to the party.
I believe she kicked it somewhere. She surrendered it. I assume that means she surrendered it to the RNC to spend where they see fit. But I haven't read the complete story.
Yeah, we'll see. But I do know.
We'll see. I mean, I really thought that she would be the VP nominee. I think that it would have been something better.
Yeah. Hi guys. I've got knocked out by an electrical storm here.
Oh, no, not the electrical storm, but I do know that the weather can do some crazy and interesting
But I
things.
wanted to share this speech with you with Kennedy because we all love him, right? And he's just was the best. I mean, they were all good. You know what? Because we voted them president. They spoke well. But this is just beautiful. Here we go. Is it on, Mark?
Yeah, let me see.
Let's see.
Hold
Can
on.
you add it?
I can
There we
add
go.
it.
There we go. Just a short piece of it. Okay, let's go and turn the baby on. Here we go.
Whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
We would do anything.
This much we pledge and more. To those old allies whose cultural and spiritual origins we share, we pledge the loyalty of faithful friends. United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do, for we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split asunder. To those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word that one form of colonial control shall not have passed away merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny. We shall not always expect to find them supporting our view, but we shall always hope to find them strongly supporting their own freedom, and to remember that in the past, those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside.
So, I mean, just great speaker, but he says something that just I home in on over and over, and they know this, is, united, we're going to be everything, but divided, we're not. There's nothing, we can't do anything. And we are continuously being divided. And I think Kennedy, one of the things he was powerful with is being able to unite people. The other reason why I bring him up is he was assassinated. And, the way he was assassinated, security changed a lot after him, a lot. The sweeping and clearing and the way that they do things, it changed completely. And so the attempted assassination on Trump has been overwhelmingly concerning to me, just like it was David Walker, when, the first words out of my mouth is, boy, I know who I'd be firing right now. And David said the same thing. So I don't think we're unified enough in this country. And I think it's going to take these next 4 years, whoever the next president is, to flush everything out of our system. And maybe we will get a real human president who is not a political party affiliate. And we will start fixing the problems of this country and uniting, because it's going to take.
That's a great way to call. I've got to leave, guys. I've got to get on a call.
But thank you, Steve, for bringing that
up. Great close. Thank you all so much. I will see you later in this week on World Politics. And thank you all so much.
And the new show coming up.
Yeah. Thank you all so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Sorry to leave early.
So I've been looking.
Tonight, Nikki Haley will be dressing the convention, so make sure you go to RNC to watch him. We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I was on Twitter and somebody was yelling at me for always ripping on Trump. And I said, well, yeah, well, I think Trump is terrible, but I think that we haven't had in my lifetime, I don't think we've had a president who wasn't seriously flawed. If you go back, the last president I can think of who I can't think of immediate flaws for the guy is Eisenhower. And the reason I can't think of any flaws for him is I just don't know that much about him. It's every president in my lifetime has screwed up.
I can't remember the exact flaws, but Eisenhower did have some flaws. I think it even came up some with the civil rights and a number of other issues. So I could go back even further, even if you're going to go back to like Washington. So I would agree with you that most presidents have had a flaw in everything. And yes, we have to be unified, and that's something that Kennedy talked about and everything. But I also don't believe in this notion of not, because as you know, one of my favorite sayings in even studying history is warts and all and everything, which means that even some of the great orators and great people had their flaws as well, because you kind of alluded to his sexual escapades, but there were some other things even in the way that they handled the civil rights and the civil rights leaders. And yeah, Kennedy was part of that as well. So while I'm an admirer and a great admirer of Kennedy, I'm not going to say that he didn't have some flaws as well.
And LBJ was great on civil rights. He picked it up after Kennedy dropped it by being assassinated. But LBJ got us deeper and deeper into Vietnam.
Which one of the civil rights leaders was adamantly against, even though people don't remember that part about MLK, but MLK was adamantly against our involvement in the Vietnam War.
Yeah, but you look at Lincoln, our most beloved president now. People hated him then enough that half the country went to war with the other half. And Lincoln presided over the greatest slaughter in our history. 750,000 people died in the Civil War, which was like, 2.5% of the whole population, just a huge amount of people. And now, so I don't know what you do. FDR is, if you look at presidential rankings, is the greatest president of the past century. But a quarter of the country hates FDR because he brought in what conservatives call the welfare state.
Right.
So we may never have a great president.
Agree.
Where did Mark go? I think that we will one day. I think that there will be someone who can come in and they're not going to be labeled a party. And I want to share this real quick while we're on this show. One of the things that has seriously disappointed me is when I started reading the articles about the rally, the shooting, the people who are in critical condition and the fatality. Something that has just really disturbed me is that the news and media has felt it very necessary to start labeling everyone that was there, whether they were Democrat or Republican. So immediately they identified the person that was fatally wounded, that, whether they were Republican or Democrat. And then one of the other ones who were critically wounded, they identified whether they were Democrat or Republican and so forth. And that has just really been disturbing to me. Why is it necessary? What does it matter?
You say it's disturbing, Kim, but you say it's disturbing, but my argument with that is that they've been doing that forever, because I've been in the media game for a while. So
I'm saying the person that was killed and all the people that were there that were hurt, they're labeling them whether they're Democrat or registered Republican. They even
go back and watch.
I get it. They went after the suspect, but that's wrong.
Kennedy and the Reagan assassination. They were definitely trying to find out the reason and the background behind the people on those attempts as well. I think that there was even some background on Hinckley, who was the one that took the shot at Reagan. I think there was some background on Sally Fromm. Was that the name, Rick? The one that shot at Ford and everything?
Squeaky Fromm, a former Manson girl. Yeah.
We got to go. We'll give this
to
Rick.
There's always been the background check on whoever they are, whether that's education, whether that's their mental status, whether that, a lot of cases, their party affiliation. So I got to kind of challenge you
So
on that.
and unfortunately, we have to wrap. Thank you, everyone, for watching us. Rick, what were you going to say?
I forget. We should go.
So, unfortunately, we got to go. Everyone, we'll see you on Thursday. Have a great day.